First thing I have to say is that you'll all get at the end an opportunity to get a picture with David, and we're happy for you to use your cameras in the auditorium, but we'd prefer you not to sort of carry beyond this discussion, you know, the ideas and things that come out from the conversation that might be considered to be breaching any copyright issues, and Warner Brothers have asked us to say that. So, but feel free to ask any type of question you want to pitch to David when we get onto that part of the session. I'm delighted that David's revisited the campus because, as Jenny mentioned, David was awarded an honorary doctorate last July for his contribution to international cinema, and it's so great that he does bring his movies often to be shot in Liverpool, and is now revisiting the campus, and that isn't always the case with filmmakers, but David is great in that respect. So I'm just going to start the conversation going with David, and then we will then open it up to the floor. So start your brain cells moving on to the kinds of questions you'd like to ask a globally famous director who is in the hall with you today, whose films have amounted to, I think he's the 5th most box office director.
Really? Oh my gosh.
And so
wow.
that's in the billions of box office around the world. But beginning at the beginning, was there a moment of influence when you thought you were more than keen and you really wanted to delve into the path of being a filmmaker?
Yes, it was in 1975. I was 12 years of age, and Jaws had just come to the local cinema in St Helens, and I'd read all about Jaws, this movie. It had been a big success in America. And my dad, who went to sea, he was a merchant seaman, a cook actually on a boat, he took me to the pictures to see it. And at 12 years of age, the first thing that struck me was this huge queue around the block to get in. This was like a real event, this movie at the time. And I went in and I watched the film with my dad, and you know, for me at that time it was really thrilling, it was funny, it was quite scary. And by the time I'd finished watching that movie, I came out, I turned to my dad and I said, I'm going to do that, Dad. I want to make films. Can I have a camera, please? And to their credit, we didn't have lots of money actually. My mum bought me from Dixon's a second-hand Super 8 camera, which was 14 quid. And that was it. I was away. I started to make, and I was obsessed actually with that movie for a couple of years. I saw it lots and lots of times, and to the point where I even built a big shark in my dad's garage, a sort of big papier-mâché shark, which is about 12 foot big. And I started making films on Super 8, and it was so it was very, it was just, it's one of those things. I was a geeky kid who wanted to tell stories, was really inspired by that film, and then decided I'll go and do that myself.
Now, many directors often cite a filmmaker that's inspired them, so you've indicated by that comment that it would be Spielberg, but also I think you've also mentioned Ken Loach as well. Yeah. But can you say something about what their filmmaking introduced to you when you were starting out?
Ken Loach's work reflected the world that I was growing up in, effectively. You know, that sort of social realist kind of cinema, and it kind of, it sort of featured characters that felt very familiar to me growing up in the north of England, in a working class community. So his storytelling spoke to me as a kind of authentic representation of the world, and so that's what I connected with. But ironically, Spielberg's work in some ways kind of had that social realist dynamic. I was watching Jaws literally yesterday. Funnily enough, I was
mugging up for
the I was doing an interview for this magazine in America, and they wanted me to talk about this film, and I realised some of the characters he'd cast in that movie were they weren't really, other than the foreground actors who were obviously stars, but he'd surrounded these actors like Roy Scheider, you know, and Richard Dreyfuss with this community of people who were very real. You know, they were the kind of really vivid, interesting non-actors that had this wonderful sort of natural presence. And so even then, even though Spielberg is sort of considered this big sort of extraordinary event movie maker, there were sort of things in it that I recognised as a sort of authentic.
Yeah, and I suppose, I mean, often Spielberg will be talked about as a director that makes greatly entertaining movies, but often with soft social, political themes underneath as well, which does remind me of of your work in that way.
Yeah, I've always been drawn to scripts that have a kind of slight political sort of context. I mean, again, I think when I was growing up, when I was making my first little Super 8mm movies, we were living through quite sort of turbulent times in this part of the world. You know, Mrs. Thatcher was, you know, in government. We were living through the miners' strike. We were living through lots of unemployment. We were living through riots in the streets. There was a sort of, I suppose, as I was forming my storytelling as a kid, I was, and there was the troubles from Northern Ireland. There were bombs in London and Manchester. So as I was developing my technique as a storyteller, as a filmmaker, the world in which I was growing up was a fairly dynamically sort of
Socially turbulent days.
It was quite a tough old time, actually.
So have you still got those films?
Yes, I do.
And do
I watch them? No.
Do you watch them?
No, they're
do you
not
let
that
other
great.
people? Do you let other people watch them?
No, they're all actually filed away somewhere. I mean, at some point I'll watch them with the people I made them with, which were fundamentally my brother and my friends.
We could put them on here.
Yeah, you could put them on here. I wouldn't recommend it. They're sort of like little short films, 4 minutes long, 5 minutes long.
So in those days, you would have put them in the envelope and sent it off.
Correct.
And then get it back.
Yeah.
2-3 weeks later.
About a week later, actually. Yeah.
Which is for you young filmmakers working on lots of digital methods. You must think that's crazy that he would have to send strips of celluloid to Boots,
to the lab,
in London.
In
And then several weeks later, the reel would come back that you could then do something with.
Yeah, and then you'd edit. I'd had a little edit machine that I would, and you'd literally sellotape effectively these shots together. It was quite old school. But
you've established a very successful directing career in film, television, back to film.
Yeah.
And your debut independent feature film was Tichborne Claimant in 98, which is about the time that we met.
Yeah.
And you then pursued some very successful TV series.
Yeah.
The Way We Live Now, Sex Traffic,
Yeah.
and Girl in a Cafe with Richard Curtis.
Yes.
And one interesting concern that's recently come up is filmmakers known for their movies who are now working on the platforms, Amazon, Netflix, etc. Are you a filmmaker that may move onto those platforms to make TV series?
You know what? If I have time, I certainly would. I'm looking forward to working in television again, and for me, it's all about storytelling. So the medium, or the platform, is one. Well, it's one consideration in terms of. It depends on the material. It depends on the story. Does the story suit the development of a sort of serialization, I guess, or even a one-off? And I think all these platforms are fantastic. You know, I was talking to someone yesterday about Roma and just how wonderful it is that how many people are seeing Alfonso's film that might not have otherwise have seen it. You know, A, it got funded, which is marvellous, and B, you don't have to trek out to an art house cinema to see it. And so people who would never have seen that movie are now have access to it. So I think the streaming platforms are tremendous, and they're kind of shaking everything up in a really good way. I think it's good for storytellers and storytelling to have these alternative revenue streams. And they keep everybody on their toes. So I think it's a really healthy...
So will you be rooting for Roma at the Oscars? Because it cleaned up at the
BAFTAs.
It had a Roman holiday at the BAFTAs, you could say.
I'm sure it'll do well at the Oscars. I'm sure it will. Yeah.
Well, we've got a clip of one of David's TV series that he made. This is a series called Girl in a Cafe, which stars Bill Nighy and Kelly MacDonald.
Right.
And it has a strong ethical and social theme, which, if I remember rightly, is to do with poverty around the world and the responses of governments to it. So I think we'll just see a couple of minutes of that, which
Great.
David might want to comment on afterwards about the style of the film.
Right, gosh. Yeah, I haven't seen that for
You haven't seen it for
Yeah.
And in that clip with Kelly MacDonald and Bill Nighy, you have the two actors who were also in State of Play, which I think a lot of people consider to be one of the best political thrillers on TV over the last number of decades. So I'm really pleased that we are able to include that aspect of David's work. Because I remember reading that when you were invited to get involved in the Harry Potter franchise, for want of a better word, the producers were enamoured by your political series, such as this and others, and wanted, in a sense, a director to perhaps bring some of that fibre and texture into the Harry Potter. So my question is that when you moved into the working on that set on the Harry Potter films, what were the challenges you faced, because it had already had a number of directors, including Alfonso Cuarón from Roma, before you, Mike Newell, etc. What were the challenges you faced in stamping it with your, the David Yates vision?
Well, the first thing is you get to develop the script pretty much from a very early stage. So in the case of The Order of the Phoenix, I was working with a writer called Michael Goldenberg, and you have enormous freedom to fashion that screenplay in a way that you feel is true and right. So you have that to begin with, and we spent a good year and a bit on that script before we shot it. So that's the first thing. And then of course, you bring in your guest. I brought in Imelda Staunton, and just the shooting style. I suppose I felt my responsibility was to grow the series up. The books were getting a bit more intense. They were getting a little bit darker. They were getting a little bit more political. They were getting a little bit more soulful, actually. So all the things that kind of ran through most of the work up to that point were kind of was sort of welcomed into the series. So I kind of like, they weren't really children's films anymore in my view. They were they're sort of a bit more
proper
grown up. They were well, no, the early ones are absolutely proper films and lovely and fantastic. But it was they brought me in to grow it up. And as the kids were getting older, the stories were feeling older, it was all feeling a bit more mature. In terms of challenges, you turn up, and I've made television, so I've made these smaller projects. The first challenge is you've just got this, everything is, times 10. You've got a huge crew, you've got a huge budget, you've got a massive schedule. So primarily it's kind of juggling all of that, and juggling all of that requires enormous stamina and a kind of staying power. And but fortunately you get enormous amounts of help. And I'd probably say that making one of these bigger movies, even though it takes a long time, it takes a couple of years to make one of these big movies, it's probably easier in some ways than making A Girl in the Cafe that you shoot in 5 weeks and you're really on the hoof. It's probably easier than a short film that you guys would make, because you get so much support and so many resources that you're kind of, in a way, you get everything you need to make the thing that you're making. Whereas, my first feature film and my first short film nearly killed me. It's like, they're really tough it's tough starting out, and it gets a little easier the more experience you get, and the more resources that you get. You just kind of, it becomes that bit easier in some ways.
But so, I mean, I guess there's the special effects side of a movie like
Yes.
Order of the Phoenix is immediately a big challenge, because I doubt that you will have experienced that hitherto on the
No.
TV work, on the dramas.
Yeah, it was, I mean, literally, I did a visual effects, we did one visual effects shot in Girl in the Cafe, which is Bill and Kelly sat in the back of a car, and it's a blue screen shot, and it looked terrible. I mean, it was just, I spent a whole morning in a grading facility trying to make it look real, and whatever I did with it, it still looked terrible. And then they asked me to do 1,300 visual effects shots on the first Harry Potter I did. And so, however,
It's a lot. Yeah.
it's a lot. But you work with really gifted people who, and visual effects are just another tool, effectively, of storytelling. So what you do is you ask yourself, just as you do a take with an actor. So when you do a take with an actor, you go, did I believe that? Did it feel right? Did it sort of, you get that feeling in your tummy if you've hit something or seen something that feels really authentic and interesting to you. And same with a visual effect, you'll kind of assess it as you would a piece of music or a cut or a bit of sound design. You take it through the same levels of judgment and go, did that work? Did it feel right? Is it telling the story in the right way? Could it be better? Could it be more interesting? Could it be more surprising? So you use the same kind of set of,
I mean,
rules.
it's very encouraging with the Potter films that you've done, that the producer, David Heyman,
Yeah.
who's, and a big plug for David Heyman, because his mother, Norma Heyman, is a Liverpool girl. Well, I shouldn't say girl, because she's now a veteran UK producer, and has won Oscars. I think she won an Oscar for Dangerous Liaisons. So David Heyman's got a strong affection for Liverpool, and so he's often in cahoots with David Yates to get movies made in Liverpool. But David Heyman, I think I'm right in saying that, wanted to refresh the series, so that by bringing yourself in, and in contrast to the previous two films, I suppose, those two directors who are eminently professional and great directors have a different style than yours, and it kind of keeps the creative momentum going with the films. Now, before we move on to some questions from the floor, we'll just have a look at, we've got a number of trailers associated with the different films that David's done. So this is a trailer for Order of the Phoenix, which is was your first Harry Potter film.
Gosh, yep.
From what year was
I've
that?
seen this for ages. 2007, I think. My goodness. Yeah. Wow. Crikey.
I mean, what those films seem to me to be about often is that they're quintessentially British, and they draw on traditions of fantasy and other worlds, and something that's incredibly British. And so it doesn't surprise me, given the talent that's involved, David himself, that they've become icons of Britishness around the world. Now, I'd like now to open it to the floor, because there are a number of people who I just want to bring in first, because they did send me some questions in advance, and then everybody else can throw in and put your hands up, and then we'll move the mics around. But
Great.
Where's Dean Jones? You're there. Yeah, okay, Dean. You'll kick off.
Hi, Dean. Hello, mate.
When you joined the Potter franchise,
Yeah.
for Order of the Phoenix, I read that you contacted Michael Newell to maybe sit down and have a drink
I did.
about what it'd be like to
Yeah.
with some film and stuff. What was going through your mind, and what kind of advice did he give you?
We went to the pub together, and it was like my dad, actually. We went and we had a pint, and he basically said, you're the man in this situation. You're the most important person in this whole process. and everyone will want to please you. Everyone will want to seek approval from you. You are the center of this thing, and enjoy that, you know, and they're going to invest a lot of money in you. They believe in you. They've told me how much they think you're going to do some great work for this series. So he basically said, just enjoy it and appreciate that you are, you know, you're the linchpin to the whole thing in terms of making it. And true to his word, when I got to the studio, everyone, David Heyman, the studio, they made me feel 20 foot tall. You know, and sometimes what happens in these situations...
Was that the special effects? No.
Yeah, the special effects, exactly. Sometimes what happens is a studio will hire a young director and they'll go, we love what you do, we think your work's fabulous, here's this big movie, come in and make it for us. And then they'll spend a year or two completely getting in the way and sort of like saying, no, change this, we don't like that, what are you doing that for? But in this instance, because the studio had a project that was very successful already, it gave them enormous confidence to kind of back the people they brought in. And so it was, you know, Mike was he said, just enjoy it. They'll support whatever you want to do and go for it. And so it was a very encouraging pint, actually. Yeah.
No pressure then?
Yeah, no pressure. No pressure.
Next out, and then Scott Meadows. Where's Scott? Here we are.
Hey, Scott.
So the question I was originally going to ask, I think it's kind of been answered already.
Yeah.
Entirely, so thank you for that. What I would like to ask is, I read an interview from you in, I think, 2007.
Yeah.
Talking about like a sort of turbulent relationship between like filmmakers and television.
Sure.
And like people who are obviously working in the television industry.
Mm.
First part of the question is like, have you noticed like a change in that since the emergence of like, television, like Netflix,
Yeah.
and Amazon Prime, who are doing their own like production content?
Yeah.
And second of all, can you see cinema sort of going in that direction whereby cinema doesn't exist in the format that it has done, and
Yeah.
sort of all moves on online?
Yeah. When I did that interview, there was very much a clear, and when I was at film school, when I was studying, as you guys are now, there was a very clear sort of, everybody wanted to be a movie maker, and very few people wanted to go into television. Television was perceived as the poorer cousin of films, and it was always kind of like you'd failed if you'd gone into television. Whereas, and I felt at that time that was a mistake. I felt it was healthy to embrace the work that you could do in television, and often that's the only gig you could get anyway. So I felt, oh, wouldn't it be wonderful if people could move between the two? And subsequently what's happened is just naturally, organically, you know, the industry now, television is booming. There's so many opportunities in television for storytellers, for writers, producers, directors. It's a fantastic medium to work in. And if anything, it's actually stealing the light from movies. Unless you have a big event movie, you know, it's sometimes hard to get really interesting grown-up stories made as a film now, and you naturally would go into television. In terms of the future of cinema, I would say what's brilliant about cinema, what gives it its absolute uniqueness, is that we share those stories together in a theatre. And I think the streaming services are brilliant, I think TV's brilliant, but what they'll never beat is the collective experience of being in a cinema together and either witnessing, as I did yesterday, the moment in Jaws where a head drops out of a boat and everyone screams, or moments that are far more profound and moving that reflect what it is to be a human being. When you see that on your TV screen at home, it can be affecting. But when you see it in the dark with 400 other people, it's like being in church. There's something, it magnifies the moment. And I think cinema will always have a future for that reason, because we are by nature beings that need to experience things together. And that bodes well for the future of cinema.
No. Hands up for... Okay, so can I have one here first and then just one behind?
Hey mate, how you doing?
Do you think there should be another Harry Potter or Fantastic
There is going to be another Fantastic Beasts film because I'm prepping it at the moment. So we are actually in pre-production. Yeah, and in fact, we're on the third draft of the script, and we start filming it at the end of the year, around about October, November time. And it's quite fun. It's set in Berlin and China and New York. It's sort of set all over the world. So there's going to be, in terms of another Harry Potter film, I think Dan said something the other week. I'm sure there'll be another iteration in some form. I think Dan said maybe there should be a TV series. That would be amazing. I'd love to see a sort of reinvention of it all for television. And of course, Joe's got The Cursed Child as a play, and that might in the future be developed. But I'm definitely working on a Fantastic Beasts film.
Are you a big Fantastic Beasts fan?
I'm more Harry Potter.
Oh,
Yeah,
more
of
I
course.
like Deathly Hallows the best.
Oh, great. Yeah, me too. That's my favourite, actually. Yeah.
We'll put the trailer on
Yeah.
shortly so you can have a good look at that.
Yeah.
Okay, so down here.
Hiya, I'm currently doing my Masters in film.
Yeah.
And I'm doing my dissertation on women in Harry Potter.
Yeah.
So, am I going to ask 2 questions?
Yeah, good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My first one is, how far would you consider Harry Potter to be feminist?
Yeah, very good question, actually. I think there are values in it which I think you could argue, you know, there are certain emotional things that are celebrated in the Potter stories. Are they feminist values? I don't know, but the notion of loyalty, love, friendship, are those, I guess those are very sort of, they're non-machismic values, if you like. They're not fundamentally, you know, these are stories about love and loss and valuing things that I think are important, that pull us, that bind us together as friends and as communities. They celebrate those values. Can they be sort of brought under the broad church of feminism? I don't know. But what was the other question? And is it easier?
Sorry, talking over, I personally think they'd go more towards Harry's perspective.
Sure.
Definitely a lot of point of view shots are used.
Yeah.
Can you kind of like explain why you chose to do that?
In which one? In which? Oh, the last 4?
In the last 4 that you did.
Yeah. I was absolutely fascinated with him as a character. And the stories revolved more and more around him and fundamentally his final confrontation with Voldemort. So it just felt like a natural, it felt like a very natural process to start to focus in on his perspective of the world, especially in the final 2 films. Yeah.
There's loads, but there's... do with 2 mics, but...
Hi, my name's Natalie. I'm just about to finish my MA in creative writing.
Oh, cool.
And it's one of the things that I'm really passionate about is script.
Yeah.
Not just from a writing perspective, but in general, as people who are about to transition out of academia, what advice would you give to people who are looking to move into the industry?
The most important thing is to be prepared for a long journey, because it's going to take time. It took me a long time to kind of build a career. And so you have to be very resolute and you have to be very determined. You also have to kind of, when you hear no, or we don't like this script, or we don't like this, you have to hear, we actually quite like it, it's just not quite right for us. So I had a sort of, every time a door closed to prevent me from getting where I wanted to go career-wise, I always saw it as a challenge rather than a rejection. So yeah, you just have to be stubbornly resolute and keep going. And also, you evolve and change constantly as a storyteller, based on your experience of living and life and some of those rejections that might come your way. So I would say be patient, be stoic, be determined, and turn no's into yeses or maybes, in your head at least, and keep going. Yeah.
I mean, you attended the National Film and TV School
Yeah,
for
I did.
a postgraduate degree, was it?
Yes, yeah. Did politics at university, then went to the National Film School. I don't think I even got a piece of paper from the National Film School. I came out, you know, what was great about being at film school is, and what's wonderful about what some of you are doing here is you get the opportunity to make stuff. And that was the key for me being at film school.
And the time to make it.
And the time to make it, and the resources.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
in the middle here, sorry, and then pass it to the behind. Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. Did you have a question? Oh, we'll come back to you. We'll come back to you next. No, do yours first.
Hi, my
Hello.
name is Brenda.
Hello, Brenda.
I have 2 questions quickly. First, how's the work with the visual effects part when you're directing? How's the process, the creative process?
Yeah.
How do you get to that?
Yeah. Well, it starts with concepts and storyboards. So we'll have concept artists, and I've got a storyboard artist who I work with quite a lot. And we'll start with some blue sky thinking. So, for example, in the film that we're prepping at the moment, we've got a big sequence that opens the movie. And so we start with lots of crazy ideas that we just throw at the wall. And over a period of weeks, starting with a shot list, we then develop some storyboards, and then we develop some concept art. And then we'll do some animation studies, because there are some creatures in this sequence. So it's a bit like developing a script. In a big visual effects sequence, you'll develop it over weeks and months to finally get to the version that you feel confident in, that feels right. And it involves a lot of people, you know, starting with artists, basically concept artists and storyboard artists, and of course Joe's script. You know, that's the map, and then we interpret the map, if you like.
The other question was about, would you consider going to Mexico to a Masterclass maybe?
Mexico, yeah, man, that sounds cool. I'd love to. We're gonna, yes, they're huge. I think Harry Potter's quite popular in Mexico, isn't it? I believe. But yeah, I'd love to go to Mexico at some point.
What do you think about Coran's last film? With the
Loved it. Yeah, a big fan.
It's really interesting to see the vision of the European people from Mexico.
Yes.
How they see the film and how they
How they've.
live the process with the movie.
It's an exquisite film. It's beautiful.
So just over there, and put a trailer on it.
Hello, mate. Yeah.
So I was just, because you mentioned Joe before, as a
Yeah.
sort of starting point for you. It made me just wonder whether there is any film or television series that you would like to remake with you as a director, with you in charge, and what you would do with it differently.
I mean, I'm developing other things. So rather than remaking something, I'd probably want to focus on one of the new things that I'm developing. So there are stories that I'm quite intrigued, going right back to my roots in a way, in terms of, you know, there's a project I'm involved with, which is about the opioid crisis in America, you know, which is affecting so many families, and that to me is quite a fascinating subject for a movie, because it's a sort of state of nation piece about how all these communities are being decimated by this drug that's available. So there are other things I would, so rather than remaking something, I'd much rather do something that hasn't been done before. That's where my appetite lies, beyond these movies I'm making at the moment. Great.
Okay, so all the way over there, thank you. We'll have a look at some other trailers of David's work in a minute, but let's get this question going.
Hi David.
Hey mate.
I just wanted my question was, how was British film different, like working on Harry Potter to American films like Legend of Tarzan and Fantastic Beasts?
Yeah. What's encouraging and what's exciting, I think, for anyone here who goes ahead and works in our industry, is my observation is that the community of people who work in this country we have a really sort of, it's very British in a weird way. We're all very self-effacing and a bit shy and a bit, you know, but there's a real community, and it's a very supportive community. when you make your way into the industry. My observation of American productions is that it's a bit more machismic, and it's a bit more, it's a bit scary actually. Whereas the people I work with in the UK are generally quite lovely and very nice to be around, and we have a lot of fun making the things that we make. Having said that, I had very positive experiences making Tarzan. I had a wonderful kind of producer called Jerry Weintraub, and he's really old school American producing kind of guy. He's unfortunately not alive anymore. But they just have a slightly different attitude. You know, they're quite larger than life. They're quite ballsy and sort of like quite fun to be around for a little bit, I would say. But generally, I really enjoy working in Europe. You know, I have very good working relationships with American producers as well, and particularly the studio I work with, Warner Brothers, who are amazingly supportive. I just know, though, from other directors that the industry can be quite brutal and difficult at times, and there are a lot of filmmakers who get treated quite badly or commoditized with other, so it's not uncommon for filmmakers to have slightly traumatic experiences making films. I've been very lucky. I've worked with the right people. I've always been very supported. I've always been very respected, and I've always pretty much been able to do what I've wanted to do. But I just know from talking to some other directors, that's not always the case. And some of that, I think, is, I don't know, it's just storytellers can sometimes get commoditized and treated quite badly, I think, sometimes. I've touched wood, I've never had that.
Let's have a look at Fantastic Beasts.
Oh gosh.
Just to say, no, Fantastic Beasts. Fantastic Beasts 2 is on in the Arts Centre tonight at 7 o'clock.
Excellent.
Completely coincidentally, the Arts Centre programmed David's film the same day that David is here.
Wow.
Now, I doubt very many other places have the wizardry of programming that we have here.
Amazing. That's cool.
So this is Fantastic Beasts trailer. So 7 p.m. in the Arts Centre. I think Kathy Butterworth is here. There she is, right at the back. So is it sold out? It must be near.
It's one of our free Film Friday events, so it's only available to our wonderful Edgehill University students.
Oh, great.
So very lucky.
Cool.
And if you just turn up, you don't get tickets. So
Okay, so we're back to some questions. So can I have, right behind you in the denim jacket?
Hi, David.
Hello.
You previously worked with James Newton Howard
Yeah.
and Alexander Gaspard and
Yeah.
Nicholas Hooper.
Yeah.
As a director, what do you look for composers, film composers?
You want to hear some music that really inspires and moves you. With Nick, I'd worked a lot in television with him, so he was used to getting tons of notes from me every time we develop a score for a TV piece. So I brought him along, and it's a testament to Warner Brothers and David Heyman. When I started doing the Harry Potters, I said, I want to bring my mate Nick to do the music, is that all right? And both Warner Brothers and David Heyman said, yeah, sure, that's cool. And which for like a $200 million movie, Nick had never scored a movie before in his life, but they were very supportive. They said, if you want Nick, you can have Nick. And so I brought Nick in and my editor. And Nick was just someone I developed a lot of the TV work with. So I used to work in his shed in Oxfordshire where he composed his music, and I'd cycle over there and we'd sit there and we'd develop the music together effectively. And same with James. James is lovely, by the way. Really the first big American composer I've worked with, and he brings his team over from America, and he spends a lot of time, many months, developing the scores for these films we're doing now. And it's a very collaborative relationship. We have lots of back and forth, and we listen to ideas. So for me, one of the key things is, one, first of all, I have to love the kind of music they write anyway, which I do with Nick and Alexander and also James. And also I really enjoy the collaboration. You know, I really enjoy sitting with them and kind of exploring what the music can achieve for a film. And each of those composers were all wonderfully collaborative and would welcome me sitting, giving them notes for hours on end. Bless them.
Just at the back, at the very back.
Hi, just a quick one. Recently I've read an interview saying that an instructor had actually told you that you were too nice to become a director.
Yeah.
I just wanted to see whether that actually drove you towards becoming a director even more, or whether that set you back further.
It was a lovely guy called Jim O'Brien at the National Film and Television School, and he was my directing tutor. And he took me into his office once, and he just said, "Look, David, you know, you're a talented guy, and I think you're doing quite good work, but I've got to tell you, mate, the industry's tough, and you're just too nice for it, mate. I just don't think you're going to succeed." And I had a very similar experience. I would go for interviews, and I don't know, I tried to get Casualty. I wanted to direct Casualty when I came out of film school. I thought, that's a good gig. And this woman, this producer on it, sat with me patiently for 20 minutes. And she just sort of patted me on the knee at the end and said, "You know, David, I think it'll take a while before you get some work, mate." So I was, but true to form, I didn't hear no or you. That did give me an incentive to to sort of prove that I could do it, really. And by nice, I just think they thought I was a bit too gentle and easygoing, and they didn't. And people often say to me when they come to see me work on set, they go, "Oh my God, you're so relaxed." And what they don't see inside is this sort of massive kind of drive that I've got. I am actually quite driven, and I am incredibly ambitious. It probably isn't obvious on the outside, but I'm for some reason, I just feel compelled to make things, and nothing's going to stop me, and nothing has stopped me. So it's, but I think you can do that and still be quite nice and civil with the people that you work with. And I have a lovely bunch of people I work with.
Well, one of the things that's said about your films is that you extract very excellent performances from actors and the cast, and that you push them to certain limits. And I was wondering whether you have an idea that you know exactly that's what you want, and then that you will go for as many takes as you need to get that.
Yeah.
And even though they may be reluctant or resistant, you nicely push them to that limit. Is that how you work?
Yeah, you do. I mean, I think they know when you're pleased and you've got what you need. So they recognise that, and everybody wants to do good work. So, and it's rare to sort of, you just keep going till you get something that's right.
Okay, so at the very back, next to the woman in red, and then we'll come back.
I was just wondering, with films like Harry Potter, Fantastic Beasts, there's obviously a great theme of fantasy and like how magical businesses.
Yeah.
And something I like to do is kind of blend realism with fantasy. How do you make the fantasy aspects of films like Fantastic Beasts specifically feel realistic, but yet not so much to the point that it kind of dulls the story you're kind of trying to tell?
Yeah, I think it's a really tricky balance, honestly, and I think maybe we got it stronger in Potter because it was rooted in a real environment and a real school. And actually, watching Beasts 2 recently, I thought sometimes we're going too far. To me, if you can root it in an emotional reality and you keep it grounded, it makes it all the more extraordinary. And the danger is with movies now, because you can do anything effectively, the danger is you get carried away. And I sometimes have to stop myself from things spinning out to just, for example, there's a sequence where Newt escapes on this Zawu, And it's a really lovely sequence where he sort of runs around the French ministry. But, you know, I'm never satisfied with anything I've ever made, so I'm always very critical of the film when it's finished. I always go, oh, I should have done that slightly differently. And that's an example, I think, where I felt it just went too far. It felt almost like a video game. And then you check yourself next time, as we're developing the sequences now in the new film, trying to sort of ground them, earth them again, so they feel like they've got a real world dynamic. And so to answer your question, it's a constant tightrope in a fantasy film. And you know, I have to keep reminding myself that fundamentally it's about caring about the characters and putting them in plausible situations. And the minute they become implausible, you've broken that magic a little bit, I think. And then people just go, oh yeah, whatever, it's a CG, whatever, that's fine, no one's going to get hurt. And that's something we're kind of retrofitting into FB3, is to sort of get it earthed again, if you like.
Okay, the young lady in the middle of that row, and that'll have to be the last one. Yeah.
Hi. About the critical thing, I'm going to speak for everyone, just saying we like your work, it's decent work.
Oh, thanks very much, mate. I'll take that. Thank you. That's very kind, thank you.
My question is,
yeah.
Obviously with visual effects, you kind of dabble with that, and obviously nerd
yeah.
with that. How do you, obviously it's always growing, blossoming as it is, how do you think the Fantastic Beasts and obviously it's going to be 3 now.
Yeah.
How do you, are you going to keep it with what you've got, or are you going to carry on expanding with visual effects on it?
We're going to, I mean, it's always going to be a visual effects heavy set of stories, just by note of Jo's imagination. She's kind of just, this stuff pours out of her head. And to realise it, you do need the help of this big visual effects team. But we are, in the next one, we're sort of, in 2 we had lots of different characters and it was multifaceted, multi-character. We're sort of keeping things a little simpler in 3, but there'll still be plenty of visual effects. And our visual effects shots, in any one of these movies, there's probably between 1,200 and 1,400 shots that have a visual effect element. And we literally, I think the visual effects teams are in the thousands, basically. So it's a very visual effects intensive set of stories, basically.
And one quick question, if that's
yeah.
okay. How do you work, because obviously if you're the director, you lead a very large team. How do you go about that, like leading a team?
So what you do is you have key people who are your core team, and under them there are then hundreds of people. So your DOP, your editor, your composer, your visual effects coordinator, you know, there are probably about 8 of them, your special effects supervisor, 8 of them who are your core team. They're your mates, if you like, who you communicate and explore and give notes to. And then from them, they then fan out. They've got their own departments, if you like, huge departments, and then they filter out all the information to the people beyond them. So you effectively make a movie with a very small group of people creatively, but then they have with them a huge number of people behind them. And you sort of keep it tight with that team. And yeah, that's how it kind of works.
We're going to have to, I'm afraid, finish now. I'm sure you might be able to get a quick question at the end before David goes, because we'll be milling around here. But I'm delighted that we were able to get David here today. He's obviously, as you can tell, he has a busy schedule with lots of projects. And when anyone asks you a question, fantastic directors and where to find them, you know what the answer is: Edge Hill University.
Yeah. So.